Welcome. Just a little bit of background on our series. We provide a lot of content and thought leadership here at Cerius. It's just what we do. It's education, it's entertainment, and of all of the programs we put on, all of the webinars, I don't think I've ever been more passionate and driven as I am at expanding the opportunity for HR thought leadership. We have seen an increased trend in companies needing to level up their HR capabilities. HR is one of the fastest evolving areas of a company, and we want to make sure that it's easy, whether you are just starting a role, stepping into a role full time, or helping a couple companies on a fractional basis where you are their HR support. You don't necessarily have a large HR department supporting you, and they're looking to you to have all of the answers. So to help accomplish this, we've created Cerius HR Today series. And this month's session, we will hear from two incredible HR leaders to get their insights on what the next generation of HR leadership looks like. So as a brief introduction, and we will put their LinkedIn profiles into the chat if you would like to learn more about their backgrounds, or you're welcome to connect. We have Angeli Elliott, who is a former transformation executive at Fortune 500 companies such as Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. She has led initiatives to modernize HR strategies, technology, and the employee experience. Those programs contributed to each organization's goal to remain relevant and valuable in the eyes of their employees as the employer of choice. And I can say, just from working with her, she's able to take all that experience from the banking industry, and you think big bank too. One of our clients has a nonprofit, and those strategies and that forward-thinking HR translates. Then we have Darren Chiappetta, who is a labor and employment attorney who knows how to make compliance topic fun. A global compliance and employee relations executive and HR leader with substantial experience in tourism, hospitality, media, and entertainment industries. He has supported company growth curves of notable brands like NBC, Netflix, Sony, Roku, and most recently was the inaugural head of HR for FIFA World Cup 2026. Any stories that he shares, he does it anonymously. As I know, after working for some of those organizations, from the HR perspective, there is a lot to share. I absolutely welcome both of you today and thrilled that we have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to start off to get your thoughts on what you see as the foundation of HR leadership moving forward. Angeli, why don't you get us kicked off with that?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My background has been in banking. And when I became an interim executive about 4 years ago, the way I would have answered this question a little differently than I would now. So, what I find that my clients are looking for is they really want me to come with solutions that are very bottom line business focused. They've hired me because they might have found that the HR function just needed to get reoriented, but they really want somebody to look at it from a business perspective. So understand the balance sheets, the income statements, the core business. The other thing is adopting a holistic transformation approach. And what I mean by that is, when you're looking to solution, you're really thinking about the business and the people and the infrastructure, and really thinking about the whole solution, not just one part of the business or one part of the HR infrastructure. You're really thinking about the whole solution. And then I think the other piece that's super been really helpful, and I had to skill up in this area, was the advisory consulting skills in terms of solutioning quickly but thoroughly, like really understanding what you're solutioning for and then coming up with a solution that's going to hit the mark as fast as possible. Especially in the interim space, you really are there to come in, look at it, solve it, implement it, and leave. So I would say, but I think that's going to be more and more what businesses are going to look for in HR professionals in a full-time role. So I think these are really emerging skills that I didn't think about when I was in the banking industry.
Awesome. So that's what I did at FIFA. I kind of got in and left it and then, and then moved on, right? Like you mentioned. Hi, everyone. I'm Darren Chiappetta. I apologize. I talk with my hands all the time. One of my first jobs when I was 17 was a jungle cruise skipper at Walt Disney World, and that personality never left. So you're going to deal with that today as well. When I think about, HR of the future, one of the biggest words that comes to mind for me as far as what HR leaders are really going to need is courage. The reason why they're going to need to dig up that courage is because I think about what the emerging workforce looks like, what's going to happen, what's the role of HR. And I think two kind of themes come to mind, which I know we'll be talking about a bunch of good stuff today. But for me, the two themes are listening and managing expectations. And when I say a couple different things with listening, right? So to Angeli's point, when you're learning about the business, what they want to do, kind of where they want to head, how you can kind of bridge that gap, because sometimes there's a gap there between what the employees want and what leadership wants. And so listening is important so that you know the business perspective, but you're also advocating appropriately for the perspective that maybe the executives don't have, or maybe they're under a different perception, something like that. And managing expectations is going to be our job collectively as HR until we retire. With the new groups coming into the workforces, which I know we'll get into a lot more detail, there are expectations on many components of their journey. And I think the one last thing, which I know we'll be chatting a lot about today, and comes, if you ask me what keeps you up at night as an HR leader, it's the fact that there used to be work was work and home was home, right? Now it's work is work and social issues now become part of the workplace. So there's a meshing of what used to be a little bit of a brighter line. And that's going to be shaping a lot of workplaces. And I know in your mind right now, you're probably thinking about some things that, we've heard about case studies and news and things like that, because there is now a commingling of the social, atmosphere and the workplace as well. So I know that's one that's on everyone's mind as well.
I love that you brought up the shaping of the workplace. And I don't know that we've seen anything shape and almost define the workplace more than culture. Mm. And I feel like we talked about this for quite some time and all came to agreement. I don't know that we can go beyond to the next, what's the future of HR leadership without addressing culture. And we know that we've got now 5 generations in the workforce. We've got moving from the digital era to the knowledge era. There's so much evolution going on, including with culture. We've gone from developing what is our culture, what are our core values, to communicating what is that culture to make sure everyone knows about it. What do you see as that next evolution and where HR leaders really should be fostering that evolution of culture? Darren, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah. So, and thank you. Kristen mentioned a little bit of my background, and one of the wonderful places I had the honor of working was Netflix. And so I think when you talk about corporate culture, you probably have to talk about the one that's always talked about the most, right? Which is the Netflix culture deck. One of the reasons why that works is because it was practiced, spoken, taught, evolved, and referred to daily, right? So when we're looking at a culture evolution, it's important that everyone is speaking the same language. That gets even more difficult when you are a global organization, right? Because the word feedback doesn't exist in Japan. So if you have a Japanese office and you're trying to explain what feedback is, you have to make sure that everyone understands. But the most important thing for culture, there's 2 companies I worked for, which I think at the end of the day really understand what culture means, how to keep that tradition alive, and how to make sure generations understand what's expected. And that's Netflix and Disney. I've worked at other companies that have had these lovely placards, really cool, nifty little sayings and things like that, but nobody knew what it meant. No one practiced it. No one cared about it. You got on the first day some fun little card you could put on your desk. And then when you refer back to it, people kind of give you the confused dog head tilts. And you're like, okay, I guess we're not talking about that anymore. So I think culture, when it goes back to listening, what's important, right? Where does the organization want to go? You got to get the tone at the top, to buy in from it. But unless you're going to keep it alive as a document statement language, what's the purpose, right? You need your North Star, but if it's not discussed all the time, then it's just kind of words on a page.
Yeah, totally, completely agree. And I think, what a lot of organizations are struggling with are how to create those meaningful touch points. So, and really rethinking how from the time you attract somebody to want to apply to while they're get into the institution, you really have to be so intentional around getting those cultural messages embedded right from even attraction. But you really double down on the onboarding. If you can instill a seed of culture in your new hire, that's going to make a bigger difference than if you onboard them. There's no, you didn't plant any seeds and they're just kind of wandering in the field of their corporation trying to figure out, how do I fit here? What is the culture here? You have to be so intentional, and then constant touch points, and really thinking about touch points that are relevant for all the generations. So you have to try different things, and frequency is a big piece of it. Like Darren highlighted, it's got to be active. It's got to happen a lot to become sticky and for people to really adopt it.
And you have to allow people to challenge it in your culture, because one of the things that I think was very successful when I was at Netflix is an idea would come out or a thought would come out or something like that, and it was like, well, that's kind of that's inconsistent with loosely aligned, highly coupled. I'm just trying to think about what it was, right? But if you get to the point where as a company your culture is don't challenge the culture, that's a problem. Right. And it's not necessarily challenging it for challenging sake. You're using it to seek to understand, hey, one of our values is this seems completely inconsistent with our value. And that has to be encouraged. That has to be handled delicately. But unless you have baked into whatever your fund mission statement or culture is the ability to have that healthy discourse, then I think it's just going to be people afraid to really kind of bring up what they're thinking in the moment, right?
Yeah. One thing I would add to that. So I think from an HR leadership perspective, is that your role is to be the challenger in the executive team in terms of the words aren't matching our actions. I actually was in a client situation where I had to say that to the executive team. It's like, from what I see, your words and action are really different. And I could see why employment engagement is not as high as you want. And so that was a tough message to give. And I had to figure out how to say it. But bottom line, I had to say it for them to really move the needle in terms of changing how they engage with their employees.
I love it, Angeli. I've once heard a CEO suggest and really set the example to his leadership team to say, anyone that has gone through our recruitment process or onboarding process, and you hit on that, the importance of onboarding, that when they show up for training, when they're there that first or second day, ask them to describe the culture of the company, because even at that point, they should be able to describe, and it's the leadership team leading the way. Angela, you just hit probably two of the biggest buzzwords out there right now, which are employee engagement. It's become such a broad topic with various interpretations and lenses. I'd love to get your thoughts for what does that look like in tomorrow's workforce, given all of the dynamics and the shifts that we're going through right now.
When I think about engagement, I think about authenticity more than anything. You can come up with so many different plans, but you need to think about, will it be authentic to that organization? So what I would recommend for a bank versus a nonprofit versus an energy company is going to be different, because it's gotta be authentic to that organization. So I think in terms of engagement, authenticity is super important. Back to touch points, relevant touch points in how leadership, middle management, and staff interact. The intentionality around those touch points, again, has to be authentic and resonate for that organization. But you do need to be intentional about having frequency of touch points, so that you do maintain that engagement. What I've noticed in some organizations is there becomes a disconnect between leadership, middle management, and staff. So maybe you have a strong touch points between managers and staff, but there's a big disconnect between leadership and staff. So then trying to figure out how to get engagement across those three levels. That's why I think it's, when you think about transformation, a holistic approach, you got to think about the whole picture in terms of giving the right engagement solution. So I'll pause there.
And I think to your point, looking at the whole solution, it's also when you look at employee, there's categories of employees in every organization, right? Whether it's manager, non-manager, frontline, hourly, intern, whether if they live in France, they live in South Korea, or they're working for us in Brazil. Employee means something different. So engagement means something different to each of those employees, right? I mean, how many of us have worked for these wonderful, awesome American companies that go overseas and just kind of drop our American culture in their lap? And we don't understand why they're not engaged because, well, a pizza party as a thank you. That's like an American, you don't like that? So you have to not, I think you need to define that level of employees. What's important to them? What's part of the culture? I think it's really important because a good percentage of organizations do kind of cross borders, right? And we as Americans, and I'm going to call myself out as well, we have very kind of tunnel vision when it comes to what to do and how to do it. So I do want to call out the global perspective of engagement means something differently to each type of employee and level of employee, right? And I love the fact that Angeli said authenticity because people can sniff out, I call it corporate doublespeak or HR doublespeak in 2 seconds, right? So if you're not authentic and transparent, you're going to lose engagement. Engagement also goes back to one of the things that I think are important to think about, which is good listening, right? As an HR leader, you're going to have hopefully your ear to the ground. You're going to know what employees are rumbling about, whether it's like, I don't feel there's career advancement here, whatever it is that employees are kind of rumbling about. As you hear it, you have the courage, right? Just like Angeli said, you're the one who's going to challenge it and you talk to leadership about it. So yeah, there's surveys. It's an evolution. It's not a fixed solve. It's going to be a point in time as well, right? And so just understanding that, listening and managing expectations, right? Because no, you're never going to make everyone happy. So I think it's important at the outset when you talk about
so
engagement,
true.
right? Like, like we had Taco Tuesdays and everyone likes taco, but Fred hates tacos. So it's like, which is like, how do you hate Taco Tuesday? But Fred hates it. Well, Fred's an outlier, right? We don't want to try to make everybody happy, but you're right. I mean, it's sometimes you feel like, like I did all this great work and no one appreciates it. Well, sometimes that's going to happen, but let's, learn from that and try to figure out what does work.
What are some things that you've seen being done out there kind of beyond the norm? Because we've talked about rewards and recognition and listening and getting feedback and surveys, got all that. I know, Angeli, you've talked quite a bit on really benefits programs to help. The more we can give them feeling like they've got ownership or they've got choices that they've got some control over, it really helps engage them in the mission, engage them in the culture.
In the past, we had pension systems. People felt more financial security in the past. I think because, they would stay at their organizations a long time. They had pensions. Many people had pensions. Now we moved to a 401k. It's a different environment. And I think folks are looking for, they're not necessarily thinking it's their forever place, but they're looking at while I'm in this organization, for the time that I'm with this organization, I want to know that some of those benefits carry with me. So 401k is a great example of that. But, other things they're looking for is, how do I top up my financial earnings? And those reward programs, recognition programs, I think are going to become a bigger and bigger piece of the pie and part of the solution, because in many ways, people are taking side hustles for a reason. They want to earn extra cash. So if you create recognition programs or award programs to do things that earn you, top up your earnings, people are going to think about, taking on more, becoming more productive. And if it hits the bottom line of the company, if you could figure out how to get those programs to hit the bottom line and fund themselves, it could be a great way to expand people's earnings within an organization. So it sounds like a little weird now to say side hustles in an organization, but it could be something, I think that might be something that might emerge as people get creative around comp. I don't think the compensation models have changed that much. And I think it is right for some, like, let's relook at the comp model and see what could we do out of the box that might work at the organization. And if you can figure out how to fund it through efficiencies and productivity, that could be a great way to retain folks.
And don't be afraid to be a pioneer. It's interesting. Every one of us has probably been through this whenever we are going for a new job and we're looking for a job search, right? You'll see this really cool careers webpage or whatever it is, right? They'll tout, we've done amazing benefits. And you're like, the same benefits I've had at 15 other companies. And it's a model of the same exact behavior, right? And I think back to, again, I had the pleasure of working for, one of the master disruptors, which is Netflix. And at the time when Netflix was like, we're gonna have unlimited vacation, unlimited PTO, everyone was like, what? That's crazy talk. Now it's kind of a norm, right? And so I remember when I was at Netflix, I was pushing, I'm like, what's the next unlimited PTO? We need to do the next unlimited PTO. As a statement, not as, that specific thing. And I don't know if it was because of the pandemic or what's happened, but I feel like we have lost creativity and that we're falling back on the old models. I think maybe a lot of us are exhausted from flexible work arrangements and all kinds of fun things with the pandemic. But where's that pioneer situation, right? Some companies are like, bring your dog to work. I mean, that's great. And I think that's fantastic too. But it goes back to listening. What's important to people, right? The emerging workforce now is saddled with the school loans. It's very difficult for them to find housing that's affordable. We got to get creative. To Angeli's point, we can't break the bank, right? We know that. Like, we don't want to get too crazy, but I think leaders are just, I don't know. I don't know if it's we're just exhausted. It's such a volatile shaping market and world, but I would love to see that next article where I'm like, that is a crazy company. And then 5 years later, everyone's doing that because it becomes the norm.
Yeah, one thing that I didn't bring up, and we chatted about it, with sabbaticals. I do think sabbaticals, the whole burnout rate is, it's in so many articles now. I think companies that start to figure out how to make sabbaticals work is going to also be another great way to engage and retain, because many folks, they want full-time employment, but they also want at some point the flexibility to take some real time off and really, like, reset themselves. And a sabbatical concept is a great thing that academia has had forever, but in the corporate world we haven't. And if we can figure out how to make that work financially, and also it's a for HR, probably a lot of HR people are like, are you crazy? Do you understand how much work a sabbatical will take to operationalize that? But it might become, something that deals with burnout and also with retention. And I'm not saying sabbaticals every year. I'm talking about, so many years at a place, sabbatical.
Each of you have mentioned flexible workplaces and flexible work schedules. If you think Darren's animated, he's about to amp it up a few because we're going to talk about hybrid remote work, and not necessarily from the perspective of, are you for it or are you against it? Because as HR leaders, and especially the HR leader of tomorrow, it's less about what do you think and what do you want, and more about how does the future HR leader help a company navigate this? It is emotionally, personally, professionally fueled. Just from our discussion on it, how do you advise the HR leader to be the shepherd in the organization to talk through this and decide what's right for them?
Yeah, and I promise to stay in my chair while I have this conversation. So it's tough. I'm just going to throw it out there, right? And a lot of us have probably been in the situation where we are hearing from the employees that they want X, and leadership is absolutely entrenched in Y and doesn't want to hear X. And no matter how many statistics that you share with them about people who are leaving, turnover, we're not attracting new candidates. People have even said, because of your return to work policy, I'm not actually interested in joining your company. It doesn't matter because that is just what they want, right? So that's the first thing that I will say is, yes, you have to chip away, chip away, chip away, because you're going to get a no, maybe, it depends on what it is. I read an article, I think it was maybe 2 days ago. It was on LinkedIn. Maybe somebody else saw it too, and I can't remember the source. And anyone that does their own research will maybe have a different outcome. But it basically said that Boomers and Gen X are most likely to be either all in, fully in the office, or all out, fully remote. Whereas Millennials and Gen Z are more likely to prefer a hybrid model. I thought that was interesting, right? But if that's true, that kind of harkens what's going to be coming up, which is that flexibility to kind of do the things that you want to do where you want to do it. As an HR leader, if you have one of those CEOs or higher level leaders that is like, everyone must be in the office, we must collaborate. First of all, remind them that when everyone was not in the office, hopefully you actually were still a successful company and you collaborated. I worked for a company during the pandemic that literally had the best year that they've had almost forever when it came to feature films. And it was everybody working from home. Now, the sound stages, obviously, people were on sound stages, but everybody was working from home, right? So don't be afraid to remind your CEOs that we made it work. We could still make it work again. But listen to what the employees want. Don't say come back to work because you need to collaborate when you've got people who literally don't collaborate with anyone except their computer screen, or clients or business colleagues in Europe or Asia or Latin America where they're literally on the phone the whole time. I live in Southern California, so for others that do as well, and other places where there's traffic, don't make me drive an hour and a half to Santa Monica to sit in a room because I'm supposed to have presence in the office. And so where I think Kristen sees my passion is, don't do return to work for return to work's sake. Please, as an HR leader, try to, at least, if you don't have somebody who is agreeable to this right away, please try to have your leaders understand that it is a dissatisfier for people to get in a car and leave their home, to sit in an office, to get in a car and come back, right? So if you can, take a case by case look at what are the job duties. Can this job be done remotely? Can it be done from a hybrid perspective? It's a little bit more work than a one size fits all, but a one size fits all just absolutely is not the right approach, in my opinion, because people feel that they are not heard. The most difficult thing for me as the head of ER was when people would come to me and say, Darren, I'm the only person from my department in the Chicago office. I have no direct reports. I have no team members here. I'm on Zoom calls all the time. Why do I have to come in? And for me to say, your leadership wants you to. It's very difficult as an HR leader, right? So courage, 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 not a one size fit all.
Yeah, I would say with remote, hybrid, as an HR leader, helping them understand that you can have engagement remotely. If you think about the tools that they use and the touch points, and also it doesn't have to be 100% remote. It can be, you can have people meet on a quarterly basis. You can have social events where even remote people are encouraged to come over to keep that engagement. I think a lot of leaders think if people aren't in the office, there's no way you're going to have that water cooler talk but it sometimes just doesn't happen for certain roles, and that's really, really true. So I think, like Darren said, you have to be courageous and help them see the whole picture and all the elements of the picture to then maybe get them to hybrid. I personally do believe that certain roles should be remote, but I'm more of a hybrid. I really advocate for hybrid environments. I think that's the longer term best solution. Mandating people into the office 4 days a week or 5 days a week or even 3 days, let the employee figure out the days, but also set the expectation. If you're on a team and it makes sense for the team to meet on a Wednesday, that's the day that I really need you to be there. And hybrid is still kind of a gift, and we need you to help us make this work. So it's also the messaging that you put around remote hybrid that's so important, because that's gonna get leaders more comfortable with it and employees comfortable with the how you operationalize hybrid, especially.
I'm going to speak Netflix for 1 second. The overarching culture of Netflix is called freedom and responsibility. And when I first went to, this is way before the pandemic, when I first went to Netflix, basically they said, we do not care where you work from. We don't care how long or what hours you work. You are responsible for your work. And I'm like, that's a lie. That's BS. Not happening. And you test the waters and you started to see how normal it was to go into a conference room and there was a bunch of people either on a screen, which was a video, or even just calling into an old-fashioned Polycom, right? And it was not a thing. And it was fascinating to me. And so when you start to work that way, to me, that was the highest engagement I ever had, because I was allowed to decide how I wanted to work, where I wanted to work from, and whatever worked for me, but I was responsible for my work product. So if you can kind of like, take that freedom and responsibility kind of concept and try to infuse that in a lot of different things too, right? Like even like bereavement leave. The past 3 companies I was at were like, we're going to redo our bereavement leave. I'm like, will you stop defining how important people's deaths are by the relationship? Like grief is grief is grief. Just because someone was not a parent doesn't mean I'm not grieving for them, right? Studies have shown that. And listen, when my golden retriever down here, my 2-year-old golden retriever, when that day comes, I'm going to be a mess for about 3 months. So we have to start looking at things differently, right? Well, what if people misuse it? And first of all, please don't ever ask for a funeral. Don't please never ask for an obituary. It's again, freedom and responsibility. If somebody's going to game the system, this is what some CEOs are concerned about, right? If folks are going to take advantage, it will come out and you deal with it as an employee relations issue. You don't put parameter, it's like, don't let the one person ruin it for everyone, right? So freedom and responsibility, one of the greatest things I ever learned as a professional. Thank you, Uncle Netflix. And I think it's a great concept that anyone could kind of, you could customize it to your office and to your industry.
Thank you. And there's, Angeli, you said at the beginning of HR is really integrated in the business and the business driver. And on this topic, we hear a lot of anecdotal reasons why it should be. There's no reason to come up with why do we want that? What's the outcome we're looking for? Let's measure the difference between hybrid versus in person. And I don't know, especially once you put measurements to it and to the outcome that you're looking for, you're now getting ownership from the employee base as well. And as long as you're getting the outcome, what does that matter? So I'm seeing more and more HR leaders saying, let's define why we want them in house on those are where we can, and let's actually measure the productivity, measure the effectiveness, and being that right hand to the business unit leader to help them do that and engage in those conversations. It's such a powerful partnership. But Darren, you mentioned the article on the generational differences. That's becoming more and more part of the shifts that we're seeing. What can HR leaders do to help manage a multi-generational workforce, especially given some of the other topics that we've discussed today in the business environment? I know, Angeli, you're currently in an assignment where you probably have probably at least 4, if not 5 of those generations in that workforce. Yep. And a range of other diverse thought leadership within that workforce. How should an HR leader tomorrow really be thinking through how do we make this one of our greatest strengths rather than a challenge?
I mean, when you have the solution, call me, right? It's all about managing expectations on different sides, because the expectations of the emerging workforce are that they'll be promoted very quickly, that there are not as many parameters around how they have to work, and there is a expectation by that workforce that the company will take a stance on things in the world, right? So while generations, boomers, X, we're used to kind of that, like I mentioned at the very beginning, that separation of church and state. That is now meshing together. So one of the things as an HR leader that you could start to get ahead of is knowing that your workforce wants to hear from leadership when things happen in the world, right? So when whatever, in any situation that potentially could happen, they want to hear the company's stance on it. A lot of companies do not want to come forward and be like, take a side. And I understand that. Everyone understands that, right? But your workforce expects you to take a side. Your Gen Zs expect you to have a point of view. And they want to hear it, and they want to know it, and they want to know it very quickly. They also have expectations that if they don't like something in the workplace, you're going to change it. So any of us that do employee relations, right? Remember the days when someone was like, listen, that dude over there, he's just creepy. He's just creepy, right? And you talk to the guy, you'd be like, hey, just dude, stop being creepy. And everything was fine. That doesn't work anymore. Now what happens is the emerging workforce is like, yeah, I came in and Fred's still there. And I'm like, huh? We took appropriate action. Everything is good. Yeah, but he's creepy. I can't work with him anymore. He's creepy. Okay, but all he did was kind of look at you a little bit. We kind of handled it. No, he needs to be fired. And then they'll go to social media to say, I was harassed at my company and the company did nothing. So please know, cancel culture has now become what the emerging workforce thinks will happen when anyone in the workplace does something that makes them feel uncomfortable. So what you could do to get ahead of that is to start training. Well, we haven't talked about leadership development, but we probably should, right? From your CEO down is you need to understand the wave of expectations that are now entering the workforce. And you need to figure out solutions, and we need to think things through, right? I've had 2 opportunities with companies where they reversed direction on an employee relations situation because a emerging worker basically threatened to say, I'm going to go to social media. And that's not the right way to be because you're acting inconsistent with your past practice. But please know the social media is the great equalizer, and our emerging workforce is not afraid to use it.
That's the attorney in the room. Get ahead of it. For
Exactly.
employee relations. I know, Angeli, you work a lot with digital transformation and leveraging the human capital. What are your thoughts on what should we be thinking to Darren's point, to get ahead of it?
So, well, Darren's definitely the expert. I have very conflicted views on, dealing with companies taking a stance on all issues. I think it is really tough for corporations. Corporations are having a tough time with the different political situations, et cetera, where to stand. And many don't say anything, but many don't say anything because it's not in their wheelhouse. They're not, it's not an area of expertise. It's not part of their mission. It's not part of their vision. So I think there is, from HR perspective, I think we need to help employees understand that there are limits to what a company should get involved in and not get involved in. And I think we need to do a better job of setting expectations with all the generations on where it makes sense for their company to take a stand or not. So if a company has a vested interest in a situation, yeah, they should take a stand. But if they don't have a vested interest in a situation, then we need to help people understand that it does make sense that they're not putting out a stance because they really don't have one, because it's not part of what that corporation does or the mission of that corporation. So I think there is a level. I think what we need to get ahead of is how to help employees understand that that a corporation doesn't have to take a stand on everything. And a corporation doesn't need to fire somebody just because you don't like them. So I think there is a big amount of change management that needs to get incorporated into how we think about the generations and how we educate the generations on how to work together, how to collaborate differently, and how to view the corporation and the world setting. So it's definitely a tough question, and there's no right answer. I think but you can make the situation better by better educating your people on how, as a corporation, you want to deal with taking a stance. But on the business side of different generations, I think we're going to have people leaving the workforce large percentages of people leaving the workforce. And I think as HR leaders, you should be doubling down on workforce planning. So there's the whole communication piece around your generations, but there's a whole business piece to dealing with the generational differences that are going to happen when you have a large population of very experienced people exiting. And you can leverage those folks that are on the towards the end of their careers in ways to bring up the younger generations to create the depth of bench. So, one thing that I loved about Goldman, they had an apprenticeship model. People who have been there, they took a lot of time with the younger people to upskill them and to groom them to be future leaders. And I think I haven't seen that in as many places as kind of a cultural model. But I think that model needs to start to get embedded in more and more companies, because there is, when I do succession planning with a lot of my clients, I'm seeing big gaps in depth of bench. So, when you think about generations, there's definitely the whole emotional side of the generation and getting everybody to collaborate, but there's the whole business side of it on how you're going to manage the shifts within those generations and making sure that the continuity of the business continues and prospers with the next generation.
Thank you, Angela. She just teed up. I'm going to shift a little bit with my last question, but I do want to, since we're going to be wrapping up with the more formal panel here, Christine's going to open up the chat. I'm going to give everyone time to put a comment, a question for our panel, anything else to share with the entire group. This is our opportunity to collaborate and share. You mentioned that succession planning, Angeli, and I did, Darren, I can see the nodding. It's like a rocking horse. As we talk about that, you teed it up earlier with leadership development. How are we, or how does an HR leader take that ownership and not just the succession planning, but in preparing current and future leaders to navigate some of the complexities? Because we've clearly seen here, as you mentioned, Angela, there's no right or wrong answers here. It's leading the way to help figure it out for that organization and the organization's workforce. How do you prepare the current future leaders and develop them to be able to manage that workforce tomorrow or be the workforce of tomorrow?
So
Darren?
I think, sorry.
Angeli, why don't you go ahead? Sorry, you had a thought that you were about it, so please just go for it.
Sorry, missed my cue there. So, doubling down on workforce planning, and the way I approach it is thinking about, a large piece of that is around developing a bench. And so really understanding your talent is fundamental to creating a bench. But once you've identified your bench of future leaders, then you put them in situations, you give them the experiences, you put them on the projects, you put them on the initiatives that are going to develop those leadership skills. And I think companies who do that well always have a really good bench. Companies that don't think about, it's not about putting somebody in a training course. It's about giving them some training, but giving them application more than anything. Application is what makes a leader. You have to put them in those scenarios where they get to constantly try something out and learn from their mistakes and get feedback what they've done well and where they haven't done well. So those initiatives, whether it's like programs where it lasts a year, where a person goes through different experiences, or their manager sets it up, or leadership sets up very, very formal programs. But at the end of the day, it's about application. People learn that the apprenticeship model at Goldman, they've always had a deep bench, and it's because they really do train their people to be leaders from analyst onward. So that mindset, if you want to create a deep bench, you need a mindset of, I'm developing, everybody's got an opportunity to be a leader. But once you identify them, then double down and create those opportunities to give them the experience to be a leader.
want to pause and give Darren an opportunity.
Oh,
Always.
it's funny because what I was going to say is exactly basically what you just said, which is when it comes to learning and development and training, in my experience, you have to be active, not passive, right? Which is exactly what Angeli just said. Anyone can launch, and I'm not knocking it because it's wonderful. There are wonderful solutions that you can use, like online tools and LinkedIn Learning and things like that. But if that is our solution to launch a training to people, good luck chasing them down to finish it and do it. And I don't think they're going to glean anything from it. It is a little too passive to expect that anyone is probably certain people will, but I don't think it's the most effective solution for your hot ticket items that you absolutely want leaders to understand that, working in a multi-generational environment or what the expectations are, or how you handle even when someone makes a comment in the workplace, which might require additional follow-ups. And, how do we have these authentic conversations about diversity, but we don't step in it, right? So active, I think, is where I would go with that, and that looks different to every organization. But passive situations, just in some respects, can be really not worth the effort. Is my thought.
One of the reasons that we kind of saved this one towards the end, I can see that in the chat, we're going to have to make it a whole other session because the number of questions and comments on skills, workforce planning, and upskilling, and we'll go through a couple of these. Annika, thank you so much. How will technology tools fit into the HR future, relevant for workforce planning, developing skills, culture, connectivity? Where do you see HR tools and technology fitting into that as the driver of it, the facilitator, the enabler?
First of all, we don't have that crystal ball, right? I wish we did. Remember that magic 8 ball? I had it on my desk one time, which was a lot of fun. And people would walk in and I'd shake it and decide if that was the answer or not. But here's what I'm saying with that is I think where I feel that we are seeing AI and technology kind of driving HR processes is in recruitment, right? Without a doubt, I think that the reason why people and job seekers are complaining about the fact that I just applied for 1,000 jobs and I got no callbacks, right? Is because a lot of companies are using AI-based, technology and software to kind of parse through the resumes. And that's not a bad thing. So I'm not knocking it. I'm not pro or con, but what I will say is I don't think AI is smart enough yet to understand transferable skills. It's going to look for certain words. It's going to work for certain things that are in there. It's probably not going to think beyond that and go, you know what? This is actually an interesting candidate because they've got awesome transferable skills and these other things. I don't think that they're going to connect the dots the way a traditional, TA team might. And so I see organizations need to be a little careful, I think, about how much they rely upon those situations, because at the end of the day, you don't want to lose a potential amazing talent because your computer-driven recruiter missed an opportunity to connect dots on their resume.
Thank you. And we've got a lot in the chat here. So what I'm going to do is go to you, Angeli, and ask you the next question here, because I think it's a great one from Ed. Aside from the obvious persuasion skills, how do you make the business case for longer term investments and upskilling to executives that are short-term financially result oriented? How do you get them to see the long-term benefit when they're looking at short-term financials?
So that's a great question. Data definitely, as data focused as you can be in the solution, helps build your case. But I would say in terms of persuasion and helping executive teams change their mindset, if I have the time, I plant a lot of seeds of information for them to think about. And what I found in situations where I might have tried the first time and I didn't persuade them or influence them to consider it, that doesn't mean I give up. I go back and at the issue from a different angle. But I always try to keep it as business focus and bottom line focus as possible. But you keep planting seeds, and sometimes the seeds are very, subtle, and sometimes they're really intentional. But the combination of giving pieces of information and building your case over time to help them understand it. A lot of times, I think executive teams just need to get comfortable with the concept. If you go at it and it's like all or nothing, either you accept it or now, your chances are you're going to lose. Sometimes you have to take the long game and helping them see the long term impact of it. So you have to plant the seeds and get little successes. Sometimes you can break down the solution to small gains to then get to the bigger gain. So it's like, again, there's no one fits all solution. You got to think about the person you're persuading and how they listen. Like Darren said, listening is the most important. If you don't understand how someone listens or hears what you're saying, you're not going to be able to persuade them. So I take a lot of different tacks to ultimately get to the end solution I'm advising. Persistence is probably the most important thing in terms of changing people's mindset to something that's really different from
Thank
what
you
they
so much.
originally wanted.
I want to fit in a couple more, and this one is going to be a rapid fire to each of you. Ramona has a great question. What do you see as the top 3 most relevant skills needed in human resources, talent skills moving forward? So if each of you were to say, here's what I absolutely must have as I am building my HR team of tomorrow, what would you want in it? Let's start with Darren.
Conflict resolution, one. EQ and interpersonal skills. But when I say interpersonal skills, I mean interpersonal understanding global cultures and global employees. Those are the top 3 that I would.
So my top 3 would be change management, EQ, and strong understanding of technology. It's such a deficiency in the HR space. We just don't understand. Not enough people in HR understand technology to be able to advise on it, and it's a huge piece of the business.
That's amazing. I see a lot of phenomenal comments. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. I want to fit in one more here. Let's go with Monica. She says, Darren, Angeli, what do you see as the next 5 unlimited PTO type of the type out of the box coming from the HR space? And she says, congratulations on working and pioneering in environments that are disruptive. What do each of you see as that next out of the box thing? Darren, what is your next unlimited PTO that you're bringing into organizations?
I can't share that because then I can't like copyright it. No, I mean, I've really thought about that, right? And I think for me, I think most attainable. Let me back up for a second. It's difficult to predict what's going to make sense for everyone, right? And so I love the fact that you asked the question, going, hey, what do you think? I wish I had an answer. And I think it depends on where you live, what the culture is, what the company is, and things like that. But I think at the end of the day, as HR leaders, if we kind of listen to what people want, we can really help. I don't think people want the free lunches. I don't think people want a dentist on site. I don't think people want, we'll have a bus to pick you up and take you to work. So I think it's probably going to be something around flexibility and how and where we work is kind of how I look at it. Now, there's not much to revolutionize there, but maybe there is. I don't really know, right? And that's what's so exciting about this is that any one of us could sit down. And first of all, I would love to like invite everybody in the room to have like a brainstorm session, like, with some alcoholic beverages and just whiteboard this. And I'll tell you what, we'll have 5 awesome ideas come out of that whiteboard session, because every one of us will look at it from our perspectives. And it's one of those things where I think as an HR leader, we should bring in our senior leaders and go, guys, we're going to have a really cool 2-hour brainstorm session. No idea is a bad idea. No one comments, no operational or budget constraints. Let's talk about it. What's the next unlimited PTO? Do that exercise. I kind of want to do that exercise. Maybe we can do that.
Here, what's on my list for, my next generation of Cerius HR today. We are going to put this together.
I so want to do this because I bet you this group will come up with some really cool concepts that could, break anyone's like, wow, why did I, those moments when you watch TV, you're like, damn it, why did I think about that stupid gadget? I'd be a millionaire right now. Like, it's one of those moments where I think every HR is like, damn it, why did I think about that? I should have thought about that. I want to do this because I think that's the power of diversity of thought, diversity of experience, is going to be really, really fueling the answer to that question, which I love. Good question.
I think it's
Angeli?
a great idea.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. And I know that we've got a number of comments in the chat here. Please take a moment as I'm wrapping up to read through them, to answer some of the questions that have been asked. And this is the power of human resources leader community. And where when we're just that lone person as the HR leader and we're trying to affect the change, it's so much easier when we're surrounded by a community of thought leaders. And I love, Darren, you know the roadmap that we're going to this. And I think that we're going to get this going sooner than later. I have no problem upping my timelines. I think there's a lot of opportunity to be that futuristic forward leader as the head of HR, because no other role has the bird's eye view visibility as that leader in HR. It's almost like being able to be that mom in the room seeing out of the back of your head, because you know exactly what's going on behind you, beside you, and you can see 5 steps ahead. Darren, Angeli, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank
for
you.
Sharing your insights, and everyone for joining us. We do have a number of sessions coming up, Cerius HR Today, some of them very much along the lines of what we've talked today because they are relevant. And stay tuned for, I'm just going to call it Darren's Jam session on the next Unlimited PTO. We're going to get this going.
All right.
Have a fantastic rest of your week. Thank you for joining.
Thanks, everyone.